Hi, good afternoon everyone. Welcome to the panel today. We are having a discussion on the transition of Web2 gaming onto Web3 gaming. And I am Pham, the committee member of the Vietnam Blockchain Association. And I'm really honored to be here today to be the moderator of the panel with the expert and like true builder in the not just the Web3 industry, but also like the traditional gaming industry. So we have here like Wenli from Bloxmith, and we have David from SimWin, and Duo from Gacha Monster, and John from Infinite Arcade. Yeah, please welcome. Okay, thank you very much, Joe. So we will start with a round of introduction. Yeah, I'm going to start from Mr. Wen.
Sure. So my name is Wayne, and I started Bloxmith about a little over 8 months ago. And before that, I was the founder of GoCrete, which is actually the largest electric vehicle sharing company in Taiwan, southern part of Taiwan. And before that, I was the managing director for Whydah in Taiwan and Southeast Asia. So that's where I spent a lot of time traveling to all the countries in Southeast Asia. And then before that, I started 2 other game companies. And before that, I was I was managing director for Blizzard Entertainment. So we developed, obviously, World of Warcraft, Warcraft 3, over like 10 games. And I would say a lot of these past experiences really helped to shape a lot of my vision regarding what we can do with blockchain.
Hi, my name is David Ortiz. I'm the CEO and founder of SimWin Sports. We started this business about 4 years ago, and actually Brian Liu and IBC were our lead investors, so we're really thankful for them to have us out here. We have some other great investors as well, like Animoca and Kingsway and One Up Ventures. I started this business about 4 years ago with the focus on really taking advantage of the trends we were seeing and really taking advantage of what blockchain technology could do for gaming. I've been doing video games now for 28 years. I started at Atari Midway when I was 19. I was still in college. From there, I was at Microsoft. I was actually the first game designer ever hired at Microsoft. We did the Xbox, and I've been working for a guy named Ed Freeze, back then, who's now one of our investors and advisors. I was at Esports for a long time, and I headed up product development for Madden NFL for about half a decade. Creative director of North American Sports at Sony. We did a game that's, I think, popular everywhere called MLB The Show, and was a studio head EP of Warner Brothers games. And I built a company in fantasy sports, which we exited. And like I said, about 4 years ago, we started building SimWin Sports. So we're building a sports metaverse. We're looking at everything that we've done well in traditional AAA sports games. And now we are bringing in a very unique approach to allowing ownership of players and teams, and really giving the fans to really live inside of this world, and celebrities a chance to own teams. So we're excited about what we're building, and glad to be here. Thank you.
Hey guys, thank you for joining us. This is Duo Liu with Gacha Monsters. So Gacha Monsters is a new venture we started up very recently in this year, focusing on Web3 gaming. We've been doing Web2 for a long time, and some unique points about our company. So we focus on HVAC technology, meaning we can build a game once and develop, deploy it to all the platforms, right? You can play the game across platforms. Also, you can play the game on browser without having to download it. That basically smoothens the user experience a lot. We've been working with major Japanese IPs. For example, we are the builder of Pokemon Medallion, that's on Facebook. And also we work with other IPs such as Mixi and also The Walking Dead. So we started implementing blockchain stuff about 2 years ago. So we were using blockchain as part of backend technology. We have about 1.5 million wallets created already for the users. But that's not related to the tokens or anything about Web3 we're talking about right now. So we started this new venture because we see the technology is very ready, the service is robust. So we started to build the true Web3 games in this new venture. And a little bit about myself, I've been with the company for about 4 to 5 years. Besides the company, I had a finance background. I was at Citigroup, IBD, and buy-side family office. I was also with ByteDance, investment and gaming publishing. Yeah, thank you guys.
Hey everyone, I'm John from Infinite Arcade, and it's amazing to be here with you all, and thanks to the team for inviting us over. So Infinite Arcade is a meta layer for Web2 games. We have about 30 games live right now on iOS and GP, and we're just a meta game that sits above that, so we're really excited to talk about this sort of Web2, Web3 transition. My background, I started off making ads in ad agencies, then I moved to monetization, so selling ads back to my old buddies at the ad agency. Built my own ad network with a friend of mine that we sold, ran Ad Colony in Europe, and then the more recent part of my career has been on the distribution Web2 gaming side, actually making and distributing games from like Overgames, an awesome company in Paris that just raised a ton of money in the more hyper-casual game space. Hopefully there's some people here that like hyper-casual games. Generally people hate on them, saying they're not proper games, they're just ads. But Axie Infinity. And then, yeah, alongside that, just love Web3 and Web2, so I've got a pretty cool portfolio of marketplaces, Roblox studios, game studios that I've invested in. And Infinite Arcade, I've known the founder, Shekit. We worked together at Ad Colony, we've been friends ever since, spent a lot of time in Web2, and you know, we were looking at everything that's happening in Web3, and we were like, okay, we're not a AAA mid-core guys, but we know Web2 inside out. Multi-billion-dollar industry in terms of Web2, billions of players in the market, in the app stores. How can we build a very simple business based on all our knowledge of UI, UX, onboarding for Web2 games, and bring these billion players that everyone keeps talking about and turn them into, you know, I don't think we're going to turn them into crypto natives. I think that's the wrong idea, but introduce them to this, you know, for us, player learn is an age-old concept that I think some of us have been working on for a long time. But we're only a year old. Our MVP was out after 3 months. We're just about to close our funding, which is super exciting, so watch out for that news. And hopefully by the end of the year we'll have probably 100-200 games on the platform, and yeah, just shout out to YGG especially for all the early support they've given us on building our roadmap.
So, thank John, and thank all the speakers for really interesting introduction. I myself think that this is a really good opportunity to have a perspective on Web2 expert that transition onto Web3. Because for me, I'm more the crypto native person, because I started my blockchain journey like 5 years ago. I built the layer 1 blockchain, and then I have companies that build application layer as well. We build DEX, DeFi, and also GameFi. We incubate MyDeFi, Bet, Titan, Arena. So from my point of view, I have like 100% from the Web3 and community and crypto. So it really also a great chance for me to learn from you guys. Yeah. So so I'm gonna start the first question that I think many people have, how Web3 can like add value and can make gaming different. Yeah. So let's start from Wayne.
So actually I have a very different perspective from many people in terms of what Web3 represents, as well as what Web3 is capable of. And I think, in my perspective, actually we divide into multiple stages. I think currently we are jumping over to, I would call it, stage 3. And so you can think about the idea of diffusion of innovation, like many people may know. In the earlier stage will be the innovators, right? And then followed by the early adopters. I would say many people in this room are talking about innovators, people who are actually creating content very, very early. And then after that, there's a lot of people who are already kind of using Web3. They're what I call the early adopters. And then after that, you'll have the early mainstream and the late mainstream and so on. But if you were to think about what does it take for these guys to really kind of absorb and actually embrace Web3, in my opinion, the key part is it depends on what is it that you're selling them. So coming back to your question, what is it that Web3 really kind of add to the table, right? In my opinion, first step is that how does it make the usual gaming experience better? And I think there's a lot of things Web3 already does that actually previous Web2 couldn't do very well. First of all, it allows the transfer of assets pretty easily, right? That's something which previously in the game, like I would say, many games, a lot of owners, a lot of players, they play the game for a while and they love to kind of be able to kind of transfer some of the asset, but in the previous setup, that wasn't easily available. So I would say for the early stages, so for people who are actually just looking for what is it that Web3 actually can do on top of Web2, this is actually something just enhance the value. But really, I think fundamentally, if we think one step further, there's a paradigm shift that comes with Web3. But the paradigm shift that we're talking about, whether it's the ownership perspective or the decentralization perspective, interesting enough, for most Web2 gamers, they don't care. Most Web2 gamers do not care about decentralization. They may care about ownership, but not as much as some other people may. So my personal perspective is that we need to help them to first see the immediate benefit and then eventually take them to the next stage, which is actually the long-term decentralization view, which is actually, I would call it, you can think of like the disruptive technology, right? The technology that's actually going to disrupt and change how the whole paradigm works. But it'll be one step at a time. And I think a lot of times we skip too far forward and try to sell the Web2 gamers on the vision of decentralization and how that's going to change the world. For most Web2 gamers, they really don't care. And I think that's where we actually need to kind of first take one step at a time, help people to see the immediate benefit, which is actually part of the ownership and part of the transfer of asset. And like any Web2 gamers can see, oh yeah, I can see how that's going to add value. And in some ways, David, my buddy here, is doing exactly that, right? The part of fantasy esport idea is you own certain asset and you can actually transfer that, you can trade that. And that's actually much more easily done with Web3 tech than Web2 tech. So I hope that kind of answered the question. I know it's a little bit high arching, a little bit more broad perspective, but I think it's important to kind of take both angles to kind of think about what's potential.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a beautiful answer. And how about you, David? What do you think?
Sure. I think Wayne covered a lot of it, and I think, but for us, the way we look at the value, for us it has a lot to do with ownership. So we've built something, really true AAA, very robust sports titles, metaverse that sits there. And the point of it was to be able to entertain nonstop. So sports is something that is purely dependent on humans being able to kick a ball, throw a ball, catch a ball, etc. And then something like the pandemic comes, or even just the natural seasonality of athletics requires people to rest, sleep, bodies to heal. We wanted to be able to entertain all the time, because if you look at the rest of the world of entertainment, movies, music, video games, poker, slots, it's digital and it's bingeable, meaning it runs all the time, it never sleeps. When you want to be entertained, you can. And so our first step was, we're going to take traditional Web2 assets, build them in a way and build them on the chain so that they can exist, they can be at AAA quality, but then we built our layer on top of that, and always with this intent from the beginning that we can have a different level of ownership, both from the teams. So with our teams, we have really interesting owners, Magic Johnson, Nick Carter from the Backstreet Boys, LaMelo Ball, Tracy McGrady, all kinds, Jerry Rice, all kinds of people like this, but then they're able to fractionalize their team so that the fans of those people can have a part ownership, so that there's a different level of investment and engagement in a club and in a franchise for sports. But then we take it another step where we put the ownership of every single individual player in the hands of the fans who buy these players. And you know, we built a player progression system and a model that allows these players to grow and improve and atrophy. But every single one of these players inside of our universe, you know, they receive the salary from the team for their performance and for existing on these teams. And so when we talk about us for Web3, it really is about that asset being owned, that asset having a clear, you know, owner. You know, people in this room can own these players. The people in this room being able to actually receive that salary. So instead of it being your favorite soccer player on, you know, TV or your favorite American football player, you're the one who owns that player. As the collectibles are sold for that player, you know, participate in the revenue from that. And we just built out this entirely robust system based on that model. And without Web3, the tracking of the assets, the transfer, the resale of all these things would be incredibly tough. But you know, one of the people, you know, that was speaking here yesterday and talking about something, and you're constantly learning, right? And I think that's one of the things about this space. You come into something and you feel like you know exactly what you're doing, and then someone says something really smart, you're like, oh, we should be thinking about that too. Or even at least we should find another way to communicate what we're doing the way someone else has. But one of the coolest things is as you invest in your players, in any of these games that are doing, you know, good play to earn, but as you invest in your players and their assets, you know, and you're able to then decide what you want to sell, you can then take your revenue from that and reinvest into the experience. So it's not like with traditional games, especially with, you know, traditional sports games, where once that season is over, your game is less valuable and you see them resold in GameStop for $5, $10. You can continue to carry on. So the investment for the fan, where they really feel like there's an engagement and their revenue they've invested in the game has value, I think that's going to be one of the most rewarding things for gamers is, you know, your money's not thrown away, you're investing in something you're passionate about.
Oh, that's great. I think that's a really cool model of gamification we got here. Yeah, so I think we're gonna back to that later with more questions on that. Yeah, and how about you, Duo? What do you think?
Sure. So I totally agree that ownership is very important, right? And besides ownership, I want to add another perspective. I think the monetary incentive for players, anybody involved in the game, is actually very important as well. I'm not talking only about play to earn, which people are doing right now. I mean, from another perspective, there can be other ways of commitment to the game. For example, we're building an ARPG game, and you know, you control the character, and there are levels you need to clear, right? So we are building a project, we are designing the levels to bootstrap the project. But eventually we're gonna release an open editor for players, for anyone to build their own levels. And you can actually charge other players to play it. It's just like Mario Kart, but the builders actually get some benefits to build their games. And then we can provide NFTs to them. They will be using their NFTs to build something really interesting, which is not only good to them, but also good to our community, to our ecosystem. That's really what we can do in the short term. I think in the long term, we can even involve gamers to help us design, develop the game. There's a lot to explore. That's going to take time, but I think that perspective would be very promising as well.
Cool. How about you, John?
Yeah, I mean, I think the great thing about Web3 is we just don't know when it comes to Web2, right? If you're purely talking about Web2, like what do we know? We know that there isn't a gamer, right? You have to look at all the different game genres and personas and game design techniques that you deploy that are unique to hyper-casual versus idle games, merge games. Even if you take casual, like the different audience profiles that play a skill-based casual game, they're different from people that like casual sports games. So the way we see it is, we're going to find out, right? Because what we're trying to do is actually blend together Web 2 and Web 3. I think it's wrong to try and make Web 2 players adopt Web 3. I think that's incorrect. Because you're making a massive assumption that Web 2 gamers even care about crypto, right? There's a great panel yesterday that was talking about this and actually what people's motivations are. So that's really what we're setting out to prove. Like, we have this suspicion that potentially for hyper-casual players, you know, they're not even gamers, people that play hyper-casual games. They're just, you know, 16 to like my nan, like 80-year-old people around the world that just love snackable content, right? And it's just that feeling of fun, satisfying games. They're not motivated to earn money in those games. Versus you've got some giant titles in Web2 already that, you know, this whole concept of, you know, play and win is pretty established, right? You've got billion-dollar companies. So what we're trying to create is an economy that works and invites in the Web3 world, the guilds, the scholars, but also a free-to-play economy that welcomes the billions of players already playing these games and gives them the option just to keep doing what they're already doing. And what we want to find out is, for this behavior they already do in-game, so in-game, off-chain, soft currency, you know, upgrading skins, rewarded video, etc. Do they want to keep doing that? Are they interested in swapping that for some kind of reward? Do they want to swap it for a token to then cash out for fiat? And there's also another important element in this whole balancing equation is mobile game studios, right? They're super important to us. And what we see quite simply is those that have the financial funding and technical ability to make a big jump right now into and make a blockchain game. But actually there's loads of mobile game studios out there that just love making mobile games, are really good at it, but are interested in blockchain, are interested in understanding about it from a game design perspective, a monetization perspective, but don't want to disrupt their core business. So that's kind of where we come in. So we need to also make sure that we're bringing something meaningful to them in terms of, you know, new players or revenue and learnings as well. So I think the next few years for us are going to be really exciting, and figuring out by genre in Web2 what these motivations are when it comes to, you know, play and earn that we talk about the whole time in Web3. Because when it comes to Web2, for sure there is not one answer, but, you know, we're running a business, right? And we're going to raise more money. So what we need to find very quickly is, within Web2, which is the genre of game and category of gamers that have the highest LTV potential when it comes to Web3 on top of Web2 earnings. So yeah, I think it's going to be super fun to find out.
Yeah, that's also, I think most of us working on, right? Yeah, finding the right user, the right genre that's gonna make the best like gaming experience. And like John mentioned about the incentivize, how to incentivize the user from Web2 joining Web3. So apart from the ownership that blockchain technology offer to the gamer, so what else can incentivize the player to join, to onboard onto Web3? So what do you think, Wayne?
So here's the interesting idea that I think in many cases Web3 offers people to think about. When we think about ownership, oftentimes what we just talked about, a lot of it is ownership of the content, right? But actually there's a different angle of thinking about ownership, which is actually in some ways people start talking about tokens. So it's ownership of the entire ecosystem. And so if we were to think about potentially what is possible, one of the things that I think we're also, I would say we're on the forefront of challenging or trying something new, is the idea of providing ownership of the ecosystem to the contributors of the ecosystem. So the easy way to understand this would be, imagine if you're buying shoes. Most people buy shoes not to resell them. Yes, there are going to be some people that does that, but most people buy shoes so they can wear and do stuff, right? So imagine if you're looking for athletic shoes and Nike says, oh, you know what? I'll give you 10% back in terms of ownership of Nike if you were to buy a Nike shoe. Think about the likely behavior of users when they actually see this. It's, oh, okay, so if I were to buy a Nike shoe, I now own, like, spent $200 on that pair of shoes. I now own $20 worth of ownership of Nike. Half a year later, I'm going to buy a new shoe. Now, Nike shoe is priced at the same as Puma, Adidas, all these other shoes. The likely behavior of a user is he's going to probably going to buy Nike. Why? Because now part owners of Nike. He cares about Nike. He would actually go out and tell other people, say, hey, look, you should actually consider buying Nike shoes. Why? Because Nike shoes actually works great and provides you a chance to kind of voice out your opinion and also provide you ownership. So he then becomes a strong advocate for the Nike shoe. This analogy can be applied to Web3 space as well. Right? So one of the things that we're also trying to do is actually whoever actually contribute to the ecosystem, provide them direct ownership of that. So the example of Nike shoe is just about spend. Right? If you spend money in the game, it will provide you benefit for that. But it's different from some of the typical way of thinking about buying tokens. Right? Because buying token is in a lot of ways like buying shares of Nike. That's different than buying Nike products. Right? This difference is actually important to keep in mind. And the second thing I think that's also quite interesting when we think about what this ecosystem potentially can mean is if we were to take what I just mentioned a little bit further and think about, okay, so I now provide you ownership for spending, but earlier the idea is to provide you for contribution. So there are different ways in which you can contribute to the ecosystem. Part of that is actually bringing in additional players. So that's also a contribution. Part of that may actually be you're making the whole ecosystem more interesting, more exciting. Right? Duo mentioned a bit earlier about creating new content. Right? So if you create new content, that's actually making it more interesting for people to participate in the ecosystem. You get ownership for that too. So really it's ownership for creating value in the ecosystem. And I think that's something that's new and that can be done in the future. And we're trying to kind of do that for now.
Great answer. Yeah. What do you think, David?
I think for us, besides the ownership, it's really about just providing experiences that people are going to want to enjoy, rather than thinking about all of their benefits that they're going to get from Web3. We say, okay, well, we know they're going to be passionate about something that we're skilled at delivering, which is great sports experience. Our business, generates revenue from a lot of non-Web3 things as well, even though we sit on Web3 tech. So we'll generate revenue from streaming our content on TV channels. We'll generate revenue from fantasy sport. We're not a betting company, but we'll license our data. But for the fan, the person experiencing the content, I almost look at the Web3 portion of our game almost, there's going to only, because there's only a limited number of players for every sport. So the rest of the fans that are there, they can own collectibles, they can own part of the experience. But really, I almost look at it like a rewards program, so to speak, where they're doing something they enjoy anyway. Like if you have a credit card and you use that credit card to buy a flight and you get reward points from the airline, you were going to take that flight no matter what. So we look at it as we're going to entertain you no matter what, and we want you to enjoy the content. And if you're getting all these additional benefits, and you step back and you look, you're like, wow, having this experience with this Web3 layer on top of it is better for me in the long run. I actually appreciate, the value I have from investing and spending time with this content. I think in addition to the ownership, I think that's the other piece is we're just giving value back to the consumer, to the player, for their participation in doing something they were going to do for fun anyway. They're just getting additional value for it. And as we go forward, like you were saying, there's things we're going to do where we put tools in their hands and allow them to build and participate in different ways. And when you have that sense of creation, you're going to spend a lot more time, you're going to have a lot more passion than us. It's going to mean more to you than it really becomes your game. We just become the creators of tools, and we'll have that portion of what we're building. But I think in the short term for us, it's just about providing additional value and reward for doing something you're passionate about.
Yeah, totally agree. I think it's a new movement that shifting away from the play to earn model, right? Just playing and earning money, cash out is not the real sustainable model that we are looking for, but instead like doing something to add value and then return value, get receive value from the ecosystem is a more correct way. I think Duo has a really good insight on it.
Sure. So to me, interoperability is another very interesting perspective to look into for this, and because we are pretty familiar with all the IP games. I'm speaking from a IP perspective. For example, if you have favorite IP and you own a character NFT, the NFT character can be used in multiple games. And you can use the same character across multiple games to experience the different narratives across games. I think that would be a killer to many players, especially if you really like the IP. I think one important perspective is actually the story, the universe, right? In one game, you probably cannot like experience all of them, but by using the same character across games, that's a totally new experience. That's one point. Another point I want to mention is actually, so we're talking about this incentive because for now it's really hard to onboard Web2 users generally, right? I think one big problem for now is the user experience, right? The onboarding user experience is not very familiar to those Web2 users. So that's something we are trying to improve as well. So ideal case, if the Web3 gaming onboarding experience is exactly the same as Web2 gaming, we don't have to talk about it, right? Because people are naturally onboarded, they are incentivized to play the game because of all the ownership stuff we're talking about.
Yeah, that's also a very good point. I think the interoperability is a really good expansion of ownership, right? Because when you, what does it mean for you to own an asset is that you can trade, you can sell it, but also you can bring it anywhere, right? So, and blockchain as a decentralized database is a really good technology to offer this ability. So, what about you, John?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a huge amount to add from a player perspective because, it's, like I said earlier, it depends on the motivation, right? In mobile games, people that already play mobile games to earn money, they're motivated by the earning, right? That's really what they care about, is that earning experience fun and gamified. I think for different game genres, it's more going to be, I think all these buzzwords are going to fall into one moving forward, right? You're going to have play and earn, play and win, play and reward, people that just play, there's no extra acronym, there's just play. Again, the other angle to think about is also the motivation, like for the studios, right? Because the reality is that building on blockchain, as a lot of us know, is not easy and very nascent. But there's also a huge financial cost. But I think a big motivation for mobile game studios with blockchain is, having spent a lot of time in publishing, I feel I'm allowed to say this, that the publishing model, it's not a mobile game studio's model, right? It's the publisher's business model. It's this balance of CPI, depending on the genre, ARPU, ARPDAU. And it's pretty exhausting if you're a mobile game studio, right? You build, you test, you think you're going to have a hit game, it gets killed. So I think for mobile game studios, the motivation behind blockchain is also for them this concept of actual liberation from the sort of Web2 publishing model. So I've been really excited to see friends break free of that model and actually, as everyone's agreeing, from a game design perspective, start thinking about, okay, if I can build my own business now, free of this publishing model, what can we actually achieve and build as a team? What are we passionate about? And that's also what I'm really excited to see sort of carrying on and help enable is help mobile game studios find this motivation now in Web3, because if we mentioned this word of decentralization, right? So that's also the question I ask publishers. Well, in a world of decentralization, what is the role of publishing? Because publishing is the opposite of decentralization, right? In the Web2 world. So yeah, it's just super excited for mobile game studios when it comes to Web3.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting perspective, not just from the user, right, but from the game studio, like Web2 game studio, how to onboard them onto Web3 is also a good challenge. And speaking of that, I have a question for Duo, because you also like a Web2 game studio, yeah, and you are moving to Web3. So what is the challenge you're facing and how are you solving it?
Okay, so generally there's a lot of learning required, and there are a lot of efforts required to actually build a Web3 game, right? So first of all, we need to understand what blockchain is, what a wallet is, and then we need to pick the right chain, pick the right tech architecture, and even besides that, we need to learn how to do finance. We need to know how to lease the token, And we need to understand how to acquire users. And it turns out like traditional ad buy doesn't work anymore. So now we need to understand how to build a community. So it's a lot of work generally. Those are the experience we had. We had a lot of people who have been advising us, who have been helping us. So they are super helpful. I'm really thankful to them, but still it's a lot of work. So we're doing it for now, for our own games. We're a gaming studio. We develop our own games. In the future, I actually hope we can help others as well. So we'll be building a publishing service as well, so that in the future we can onboard other Web2 developers more conveniently, so that they don't have to go through the same path we've gone through.
Yeah, really nice. Yeah, I think there's a lot of challenges as well, like you say. Because I'm also working with some game studio in Vietnam, happen to build a blockchain game and deliver that to the community. And then all the time we need to, there's no formula for that. Like, there's no formula for building a community, no formula for launching a token and acquiring users through NFT sales, stuff like that. Every time we need to build a new, and it really exhausting. So yeah, so I hope that we can learn a lot from that. And then moving forward, I think John, you are building a platform called Infinite Arcade, and it's like a meta layer, right? You're adding reward and tournament. You have the game studio to overcome all the friction of moving from Web 2 to Web 3, and also player spend more time and engage more in your platform. So what is like the difference in the player persona for crypto player and platform user that you learn?
I mean, the clue is in play to earn, right? You know, scholars are there to, that's their job, right? They need to extract income from a game to, you know, given the economy that we live in, and you know, sadly, industry has been wiped out. It's amazing that Web3 now enables this, right? But that is their job, right? They are not motivated to keep money in your game. They need to put food on the table, pay the rent, pay the electricity. But it's a difficult one because, you know, talking to scholars. Talking to scholars, this is my voice. It's just upsetting technology. I'm trying to talk about Web 2 and they're like, turn it off, Web 3. But talking to scholars, you know, guess what? They are also gamers. They love RPG games, mid-core games, right? So I think it's, again, I don't like these titles because they're very misleading. But again, it's a business model. So scholars have to play certain games to earn money, because that's the way the current, you know, the panel yesterday was right, we're talking about GameFoy 1.0, right? So GameFoy 1.0 is set up in a way that you have to play certain games in a certain way to basically extract money, multiply earnings. But what we already see from sort of Web 2 players, and just, again, I agree with you, this concept, building Web 2 games is great, because you never have to think about Discord. Right? You don't have this army of people like, when game, when update, right? Like, we control that in Web 2. We tell you when the update's coming, right? We tell you when the game's coming. But what we're seeing already is that friction, and Joe mentioned it, right? And I think this is one of the biggest challenges for Web 2 to Web 3 is UI UX, right? As a Web 2 gamer, I think we're all pretty comfortable with, I mean, thanks to obviously the ATT changes, you don't just download an app anymore and start playing. There's about, depending on your country, 1 to 3 yes, no's, opt-in, no thanks, I love ads, I don't love ads, before I can even start playing a game. So I think there's, first of all, is a problem with Web 2 UX, but with Web 3, we are, you know, playing around with that, using all our Web 2 knowledge about creating different game loops and game cycles for these different cohorts of players to understand the best point to start introducing this, right? Because, you know, if you introduce it at the wrong time, you already see massive churn in the game, right? And that's not a good thing, right? Because obviously you lose the player pretty quickly. But the other thing is, I truly believe that for some of these Web 2 gamers, I think the other big barrier is NFTs, right? I think we're trying to give people something they just don't want. What if they actually don't want to own an NFT? What if they just want to play an amazing game and their motivation is whatever this concept of earning means? What if that is the main driver for them? So also that's a thesis that we are testing. I'm not saying that's for everyone, and don't give me like evil looks, but you know, like, I'm an NFT maxi, I've spent way too much money on JPEGs, but I truly believe for some people, ownership is more about the financial reward side versus actually owning an asset. I think the ownership of assets, having spent a lot of time in more mid-core RPG games, I think that naturally lends itself very well to Web3 because you've got really rich, complex economies, loads of skins and weapons and upgrades. So really just layering on sort of Web3 and ownership and NFTs and interoperability onto that actually feels quite natural to me as a developer and a player. Versus for other games, it just feels very weird. It's like I'm trying to put something in a game that should just not, it just feels wrong, right? And I think always as a game developer, if something feels wrong, your gut reaction is it just shouldn't be in the game, right? It's not rocket science. So yeah, I think if we're here next year, I can probably give you some pretty concrete examples and data points and share with you exactly what is working, what isn't working, and be a year in solving some of these answers to what this very, very smooth transition, so that you go to the App Store, you download your game, and without really even knowing it, and this is really what we're aiming for, you're playing this really cool Web3 game. And that's the key, right? You're playing a really cool game, and you just totally forget it's not about Web2, Web3, which L1 you're on, which token you're earning. You're just playing an awesome game. And there's just this byproduct that you're part of an amazing community, and that you have the choice over what that exit is, whether it's a Starbucks voucher, Qantas flights, or whether actually it's just nothing, and you just keep playing within the game.
Yeah, I think the amazing point from Duo and John. I can reiterate on the point we got here is that the first thing is that the funnel of onboarding user onto the what we call the Web3 experience is really clumsy, right? As first, we require user to understand blockchain technology, and then they need to somehow create wallet that need like separate like trails words, and most of people just capture the screenshot of the separate. It's not really security, right? And then they somehow need to buy a token, and then buy an NFT, and then go to the game, and enjoy the game. So at the very end of the funnel. So the point of Duo and John making is that we need to flip that funnel and we target the game first, and people then they have access to NFT and somehow the token, and then when they aware of that, they will learn to use wallet, and if they want, they can dig deep into the blockchain technology. They don't just play the game. So that's a really good point. Yeah. So for player experience, now we mentioned it, that when I think you have a great experience when you managing a lot of like big title in back in the time in Riot and Blizzard, right? What can you share with us, the player experience?
So I'm going to be upfront. I think that's something that's going to share with several others. Currently, Web3 gaming experience suck for most people. And myself, I'm a gamer for almost 4 decades, and I think it's got a lot of room for improvement. And so if we're to take a step back and think about what Web3 gaming experience can be, I actually think it can be even better than Web2, because both at an engagement level, as well as at the you can say the ownership and the caring level is higher. But why is it so broken? And I think part of this experience really comes from the fact that we're trying to push technology before the experience. Right? So one of the things I really, I wouldn't say I'm a huge fan of Steve Jobs. I do like Steve Jobs. So one of the things that I think I learned from Steve Jobs is really oftentimes we have the natural inclination to say, oh, this is a new tech, let's use this tech, and do everything around the tech, as opposed to take a step back and think about what is it that we're hoping to do, provide to the gamers? What kind of experience do we want them to have? And does that tech even make sense, right? Some of the experiences that we want to provide, that tech doesn't really make sense, right? So that's not forced tech into areas that we don't really need it. So coming back to the Web 2 versus Web 3, I think my perspective, having kind of been in the game industry for so long, really fundamentally we should think from the gamer's perspective. What is it that they really want? What kind of experience do we think we can actually enhance with blockchain tech? And do it selectively as opposed to wholesale. Every game should have this, every game should have that. Like, I don't really want that for this game. It doesn't make sense. Okay, we'll sort of, that's bundled in, too bad. So,
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, because I myself am a gamer as well. Yeah, there's some game that I played for so long. For example, the Monster Hunter, I played all the version for like 15 years. And I also like incubate and work with game studio to work to build like Web3 game, right? And every time I'm looking at the NFT game, and sometimes I ask myself question that why do I make the game? Why I actually play the other games, right? And I really want to enhance that. And yeah, I can share your opinion on that. And I think another way to put that is that we have to translate the technical term into something that the user, consumer understand. For example, blockchain translate into ownership. For example, if you play this game, it's not blockchain, but you have the ownership of the game. You translate the token, the governance token into the voting right, and you have your say in making the direction of the game, for example. And NFT, we don't need to mention the technical term, but we translate it into like tradable or like customizable or cross platform, cross game item, for example. I think that would be much greater. And you see, there's the thing that I'm really think is lacking in the Web3 gaming is that's the immersive experience. It's like the game you play, sometimes you just click to and click and receive token and send, So talking about that, I think David, you have a lot of experience on this one when you build a great model.
Sure. You hit the key word there, and that's immersion. So you made a lot of great points. Having made video games now for almost 30 years, I think every time there's a new piece of technology, and I can think of so many of them, there's this pressure either from a publisher or from expectation. We have to find a way to use this thing. We got to stick it in. I remember like simple things like a rumble pack. Every game has to have a rumble pack. Every game has to have controller vibration. Every game has to have whatever the new thing was, and that was going to make the game great. And it's really about finding the right pieces, using them for the right reasons. When you're creating an experience, I think that's one of the biggest things. And this is an interesting time because you're seeing so many people make a lot of money, and the challenge comes when you say these games suck. I think there's a lot of pressure. People are like, well, get it out. Well, these guys did this and it worked, so you need to do it too. So put it in there and do it. Well, that's how they did it. And then you end up with a bunch of clones, where the first game may actually been pretty cool, but by the time you've seen the same experience 25 times, you're like, this sucks, right? And it's not because of any other reason than either the people who are chasing the innovators are looking to just try to find a way to make a dollar, right? And they're not really thinking about anything else, or they're backed by people who they've seen it work, and so that has to be the way. Well, why are you doing it differently? And then there's no patience, and when there's that lack of patience, that's when you get these copycat games, and that's when the innovation suffers. But maybe one of the best things that's happening, and this may be unpopular, but when there is a bear market, and this has been talked about a lot, people have to go into the lab and really think about how they're going to entertain someone, how they're going to attract their dollars, how they're going to differentiate. And with that desire for differentiation, so you can be not just part of the herd, is when the innovation comes, when the immersion starts to happen, and when the player benefits. Ultimately, the whole ecosystem benefits, because it's going to become a more mature and respectable way to entertain people. But it has to be a scenario, and it's happening no matter what, where people aren't just focused on how do you turn a corner and make another buck. But as soon as someone does something different, and they have some profit, then someone is going to try to figure out how we do something like that too. And so we just need to continue to, what will happen is people on this panel, people in this conference, people sitting in the crowd right now, pushing forward with what they believe is a great experience, and then using Web3 as exactly what it is, tools, technology. Every game doesn't have to be, a 3D game, dripping high res, running in 4K or 8K. Every game doesn't have to be a 2D pixel shooter. Like, games can be different, and as long as you're providing an experience that's going to touch base with an audience, and then ultimately you have to deal with the metrics. The metrics counters over there, but nonetheless, you push for innovation.
That's a really great answer. Yeah, I think we can learn a lot from that to increase the experience of the Web3 gaming and somehow find like a killer game for the next. And yeah, and this the market condition, I think is really good for builder, right? Because it's like a detox period for the industry. Like we wipe out the clone and some copycat game, and people are just in it for quick buck, they're just out and resting. And then yeah, and then after on any bear market or like depressions will come out, like the next unicorn. Yeah, you can see for example like Amazon is get out in the bear market become unicorn, and we think it's a great opportunity for all of us, the builders here. I think this is one of the most I think question that people want to hear from when it comes to conference. This is about the prediction of the speaker about what comes next, right? What is the next trend? What is the next movement? What is the next big thing? Maybe in the next year, in the next bull cycle, or in the next 5-10 years. So yeah, so what do you think?
Interesting, but also pretty hard question. But actually, I'm thinking, I don't know if it's going to happen in the next 5 years, but I think there is that perspective of potentially there is a persistent world in which you can actually operate in a game. And when I say persistent world, I'm talking about a game that doesn't just end when you stop playing. Actually, that persists. And the reason why that's actually interesting is because that will actually then link metaverse together with blockchain. Part of the value of being able to really own some asset from the game is the ability to really kind of apply that. And when there's persistency, the value actually increases dramatically, right? Imagine if you own a car, you can use the car in multiple games, but not just any game, but actually in multiple ways. That persistence actually, not just about interoperability between games, but persistence in your life. That actually is something which I think potentially can happen. And I think that can potentially change how we look at a lot of things. So that's, I don't know if it's going to happen in 5 years, maybe 10 years, but I think sometime in the future, a lot of our lives are going to be happening in a different space, not just in the space that we see today.
Yeah, I think persistently really cool feature you have in the game. You might remind me of some video game, I'm not sure remember, but is it Metal Gear Solid? That is a boss that if you don't just unblock the game for like 8 days and you come back and the boss will die of old age. I think, yeah, I think it's yeah, it's a sniper, right? Yeah. So how are you, David?
I think Wayne touched on something there for sure. I think persistence, I think, we look at it from a metaverse perspective because we're looking for the next place where people want to spend a lot of their time and be immersed. I think you're going to see definitely a lot of persistence. I think you're going to see ways for people, almost kind of Ready Player One-ish type experiences where not necessarily all just about combat and competition, but just finding places where you want to be. And if you're going to spend a lot of time there, what can you both contribute and take out of? I think you're going to see a lot of opportunities for crafting inside of experiences. I think that's going to be a big part of it. I think you're going to see, you are going to see this shift where there's going to be a percentage of the population for entertainment, for fun, for leisure, for even vacations, for education, where they are living, virtually in a metaverse, Web3 being a big component of how the finances and ownership and, so many things that we do in IRL right now are going to be happening. I think that's a big part of it, but I think people are in this space are going to be motivated by they're going to at least be drawn into how they're entertained. But I definitely think immersion, persistence, and this metaverse components, as well as crafting, are going to be a big part of what's going to happen in the next 5 to 10.
Yeah, so it's a play to belong, right? Yeah, you find play in a metaverse where you can really be yourself. Yeah, it also match with the new, I think, new narrative of alter ego. So you can be a different person online. Yeah, using new identity.
Hopefully it's a healthy version of yourself, right? Because one of the most unfortunate things that we've experienced from Web2 and in this last generation is people having an opportunity to have an alter ego where they're able to be even nastier than they would be, have the courage to be in person. And so hopefully, people are having a good enough experience and they're being able to satisfy portions of their experience in their life where they feel rewarded. They don't have to go there to grief. They can go there to enjoy. I know it sounds utopian, but that's at least the hope of what people do with the technology. Right?
Yeah, I hope so too. Yeah. Oh, how about you, Duo?
Sure. So it took me several points. First, user. So first, I think user experience. We talk a lot about it. I think at the OKs, users don't have to care about wallet, secret phrases, signing transactions while they play the game. We know there are good stuff in Web2 gaming, there are good stuff in Web3 gaming. Ideal cases, they get combined, right? So users can just enjoy the game, and they can just deal with their NFTs whenever they want, deal with their tokens whenever they want. Another piece is metaverse. I mean, from a broad metaverse perspective, from an IP perspective, I don't think you will see anytime soon in the same game Mario, like Street Fighter, Final Fantasy in the same world, right? It takes a lot of work to make a Smash Brothers, right? Not everybody can do it, but at least we can build multiple games under one IP that's in the short term we can achieve, hopefully. So I think that would be interesting, echoing what I just shared with you guys. Another point is, for now, the games are majorly, let's say, are solely operated by the game developers, right? If the game developers decide to close the game, the users cannot play that anymore. In the future, I hope through organizations such like DAO, not only developers, but also players, the community can help maintain the game so that the lifespan of the game will be prolonged and more users can be involved in the maintenance. I think that's something very cool in the future. I guess it's going to take time for people to build a very robust mechanism, but it's going to be promising.
Yeah, I agree. There's also that talk already about the mechanism called the open decentralization. This is where developer can join in and build and get reward from the DAO-like system to continue to operate the game or expand the game, even if the original developer they quit. Yeah. So, I'd love to hear from you, John.
Yeah, I think two things. One, taking blockchain mobile, and I'm not talking about Solana's new handset, is what we're discussing, right? I love mobile games. Stop trying to make me play really sucky WebGL builds, right? My mobile phone is here, right? Not my Mac. So let's get back to building games for people where they actually spend time. I know a lot of people play console games, PC games, but there are billions of players that love mobile games. So let's figure out a way to make blockchain mobile. I think the second thing linked to that, for it to succeed, has to be sustainable tokenomics. you know, anyone working in game design isn't surprised at what's happened in P2E games. You cannot sustain a game economy on like 3,000 players. It's impossible, right? I can only think of probably a couple of examples, like Axie and Splinterlands, that have actually been able to sustain something meaningful in this last bull run. Part of it, obviously, you know, very favourable token prices and having a big war chest. But outside of that, I mean, again, everything is just failing. I think the average lifespan for a P2E game right now is 3 to 6 months. So I think moving forward, we have to figure out this, you know, I think it's just going to be commonplace now that you design, you know, your game design team are thinking about this duality of free to play and play to earn, and nailing how those two work and balance each other out, because I think you need both of them, certainly in the sort of mobile game architecture to succeed. And to scale that, you need, you know, way more than 3,000 players. You know, even if you're in certain niche mobile games, like, you know, and friends that make idle games, they're certainly not niche, but they're a niche category of mobile games. Still, you can have a very profitable game, but you're talking about around about 1 million players, you know, a couple of million players, right, that you can make a lot of money from and monetize really well. But that's a lot more than 3,000. So I'm just excited to see those two come together over the next, you know, I'm looking no further ahead than next year, to move this space forward.
Yeah, I think we all are looking forward to that as well. And I think that will conclude our panel, because we technically run out of time. And so I think we all learned a lot from our speaker today about the challenges and the way we can overcome it to transit not just like user from Web2, but the game studio like developer builder onto the Web3 space, so for the greater future. Yeah. So thank you once again. And for your
I got that.